What do you do when someone you trust completely turns out to be hiding dark, life-altering secrets? This is my story of love, betrayal, and rebuilding my life after discovering shocking truths about my ex. From the dream of owning a food truck to uncovering plans that shook me to my core, I share the journey of trusting again after being broken. Stay tuned as I recount the twists and turns that led to a shocking sting operation and the lessons I carry today. The warm, golden glow of the overhead light in my kitchen spilled across the polished countertop, reflecting off the beads of sweat that dotted my forehead. The rich aroma of beef tenderloin braising in a wine reduction filled the room, mingling with the faint hint of thyme and garlic. It was a comforting scent, one that carried a sense of warmth and tradition. But tonight, it felt heavier, as if the air itself bore the weight of my memories. I wasn't just preparing a dish, I was crafting a story layered with the flavors of resilience, heartbreak, and hard-won wisdom. Around me, the chaos of the cooking competition swirled, punctuated by the clang of pots and the staccato rhythm of knives against cutting boards. Yet, amidst the din, I could feel a quiet storm within me, emotions roiling as I reflected on how I had arrived at this moment. Jack, one of the judges, called out, his voice cutting through the haze of activity. His tone was even, curious, as he leaned slightly forward. "This dish isn't just about flavor, is it? There's a story here." "What's the story you're trying to tell?" For a moment, I froze. My hands rested on the edge of the counter, gripping it as if to anchor myself. The room faded around me, replaced by a cascade of memories, images of triumph, love, betrayal, and the long road to self-discovery. "This dish," I began, my voice steady but tinged with emotion, "is the culmination of a journey. It's about trust, about losing it and finding the strength to rebuild your life when everything you thought was solid crumbles beneath you." The judge's eyes lingered on mine, probing, as if he could see the weight of my past hanging in the air. I exhaled deeply, steadying myself. This wasn't just a competition, it was a confrontation with my history, a chance to share a piece of myself with the world, even if it meant exposing old wounds. The competition carried on around me, but I was elsewhere, standing at the threshold of my past. Light and shadow intertwined in my kitchen, much like they had in my life, illuminating both the beauty and the scars of the path I had walked. It was early spring, 3 years ago, in Portland, Oregon, a city that smelled of fresh rain, blooming cherry blossoms, and, if you walked downtown long enough, the savory aroma of food carts clustered on every other street corner. That particular morning, the culinary classroom at our school was alive with chatter and clanging pans, everyone gearing up for the final project of the term. I was hunched over a station, carefully measuring out cinnamon for a test batch of brioche dough, when the door opened with a creak. The energy in the room shifted as Veronica walked in. She had that effect, an almost magnetic presence that made people stop what they were doing, even if just for a moment, to watch. Her auburn hair framed her face, cheeks lightly flushed from the chill outside. She wore a leather jacket that seemed at odds with the crisp chef's whites she'd soon change into, but somehow it worked. Veronica radiated confidence, yet there was a playfulness in her eyes, like she carried secrets she might just share if you stuck around long enough. She didn't hesitate to make her way over to my station. Placing an apple on the counter between us, she raised an eyebrow. "Jack," she said, her voice soft but direct, "do you think an apple pie could ever be considered art?" The question caught me off guard. I straightened up, dusting flour off my hands, and looked at her. "Of course it can," I replied with a grin. "But only if the baker has enough passion." Her smile widened. "Passion, huh? I guess I'm in the right place then." From that day on, Veronica and I became inseparable in class. She was sharp, quick to learn, and had this knack for turning ordinary ideas into something extraordinary. While I obsessed over the intricacies of French pastry techniques, she'd lean over and whisper, "But what if we added a twist? Something unexpected, like cardamom or lavender?" She always thought outside the box, and I found myself eager to hear her perspective. A month after graduation, we were sitting in our favorite cafe, a cozy spot with mismatched chairs and walls plastered with local artists' work. The rain pattered against the window, creating a rhythmic backdrop to our conversation. We had been talking about life post-school, our ambitions, fears, and the pressure of figuring out what came next. The lattes in front of us were half empty, steam still curling up lazily as we stared at the notebook spread across the table. "I don't want to spend my life working in someone else's kitchen," I said, leaning back in my chair. "Don't get me wrong, I love the craft, but I want to create something that's mine." Veronica nodded, her gaze steady. "So why not? Let's build something. You've got the skills. I've got the vision. What's stopping us?" I raised an eyebrow, skeptical but intrigued. "You're saying we just start a business? It's not that simple." "Why not?" she challenged me. "Portland thrives on small businesses. You've seen the food trucks around here, they're iconic. We could do something different. Unique. Something that screams US. I paused, the wheels in my mind turning. "A food truck? You think we could pull that off?" She leaned forward, eyes lighting up. "Absolutely. Think about it, Jack. A food truck is low overhead compared to opening a restaurant. Plus, it's mobile. We can go where the customers are. Farmers markets, festivals, downtown lunch spots. We'd have flexibility." That conversation was the spark. Over the next few weeks, we met almost daily to brainstorm. Late nights turned into early mornings as we mapped out the vision. We huddled over laptops and sketch pads in every cafe and library in Portland, surrounded by coffee cups and crumpled napkins with half-formed ideas scribbled on them. "What's the concept?" Veronica asked one night, clicking her pen impatiently. "We need a hook. Something that sets us apart." I thought for a moment, then said, "What about seasonal menus? Using locally sourced ingredients? Portland loves farm-to-table." She nodded thoughtfully. "Okay, but let's take it a step further. How about we reinvent comfort food? Classics with a twist. Mac and cheese made with smoked Gouda and truffle oil. Grilled cheese sandwiches with artisanal bread and caramelized onions. Stuff people know but can't get anywhere else." I grinned. That could work. We spent hours debating everything from the name of the truck to the type of equipment we'd need. Veronica was relentless, pushing me to think bigger. "Don't just give people food," she said one evening, pointing at me with the tip of her pen. "Give them an experience. Something they'll talk about." One rainy afternoon, the conversation turned serious. We were seated at the same cafe where the idea first took root, surrounded by stacks of flyers and estimates from truck manufacturers. Veronica leaned back in her chair, chewing her bottom lip, a rare sign of hesitation. "Jack," she said slowly, "we're going to need money. A lot of it. Have you thought about how much you're willing to invest?" I hesitated. I had spent years saving every spare dollar for my kitchen gigs, building a nest egg I'd always envisioned putting toward a restaurant. A food truck wasn't quite the same, but it felt like the first step toward that dream. "I've got $100,000 saved up," I admitted. "It's everything I have." Her eyes widened. Wow, that's a lot. Are you sure you're ready to put all of that on the line?" I nodded. "If we're going to do this, we do it right. No cutting corners." "But Veronica, you're part of this too. We'll split the profits 50-50, but I need to know you're all in." She reached across the table and took my hand, her expression serious. "I don't have the money to contribute right now, Jack. But I'll give this everything I've got. I'll handle the marketing, the branding, and the business side. You can focus on what you do best, creating." I studied her face, searching for any hint of doubt, but there was none. She was confident, determined. At that moment, I believed in her as much as I believed in the dream we were building. "All right," I said, shaking her hand. 50-50, let's do this. By the end of that month, we had purchased an old step van from a guy across town. It smelled faintly of gasoline and French fries, but with a bit of elbow grease, it had potential. Veronica dubbed it our blank canvas, and together, we spent weeks transforming it into the food truck we'd envisioned. The walls were painted a vibrant green, with the name, The Hungry Fox, emblazoned in bold, whimsical letters, a nod to Veronica's sly sense of humor. Inside, we installed state-of-the-art equipment, from a griddle and fryer to a mini convection oven. Looking at the finished truck, I felt a swell of pride. This wasn't just a business. It was a leap of faith, a testament to the partnership Veronica and I had forged. Little did I know, it was also the beginning of challenges I couldn't yet foresee. But in that moment, under the gray Portland sky, it felt like anything was possible. It's funny how life can go from feeling like a dream come true to a nightmare you didn't see coming. A year into running The Hungry Fox, our food truck business was thriving. Portland loved our take on comfort food with a twist. Lunchtime crowds lined up rain or shine, and we had regular gigs at the farmers markets and even catered a few weddings. By the end of most days, I was exhausted but proud, cleaning the griddle and counting the till while Veronica worked her magic on social media, making sure everyone in town knew about our specials. For a while, it felt like we were unstoppable. But then, little things started to chip away at that sense of security. I noticed discrepancies in our finances, not at first, but over time. Small amounts of money disappearing, invoices that didn't seem to add up. I brushed it off initially, chalking it up to the chaos of running a business. But when the balance in our business account dropped below what I expected, I knew I couldn't ignore it anymore. One evening, after a long day at the weekend market, I decided to bring it up. "Veronica," I said, keeping my voice as calm as I could. We were sitting in the tiny kitchen of our apartment, the smell of leftover grilled cheese still lingering from our late-night snack. "Have you been withdrawing money from the business account? I've noticed some large transactions that I don't recognize." Her head snapped up from her laptop, where she'd been scrolling through photos from the day to post online. "What are you trying to say, Jack?" she asked, her tone defensive. "I'm not accusing you," I said quickly, holding up my hands. "I just want to understand what's going on. We're behind on a few payments, and I thought we had enough in the account to cover everything." Her eyes filled with tears, and before I knew it, she was sobbing. "You think I'm stealing from us? Is this how you treat the woman you're supposed to love? The woman you said you build a life with?" I felt my resolve waver. This was Veronica, the woman who had been with me since the beginning, who had believed in my dream even when I doubted myself. "I'm sorry," I murmured, reaching across the table to take her hand. "I didn't mean to upset you. I just needed to ask." That should have been my wake-up call. Instead, I let it slide. A month later, our supplier called. It was late in the afternoon, and I was restocking the truck after a lunch shift when my phone buzzed. The voice on the other end was polite but firm. "Jack, I hate to bring this up, but your account is 3 months overdue. We've been patient, but we can't keep delivering unless the balance is paid." 3 months? My stomach dropped. I promised to resolve it immediately, then hung up and stared at the truck's dashboard, my mind racing. How had we fallen so far behind? I'd been checking the account regularly, or so I thought. Something wasn't adding up. That night, after Veronica went to bed, I stayed up and logged into the bank account. I had avoided doing it earlier, afraid of what I might find. But as the transactions loaded on the screen, my worst fears were confirmed. Thousands of dollars had been withdrawn over the past few months. Every withdrawal was made at ATMs near casinos outside the city. My heart sank. I scrolled through the list, each transaction hitting me like a punch to the gut. In total, Veronica had taken over $50,000. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was deliberate. The next morning, I couldn't hold it in any longer. As Veronica sipped her coffee, scrolling through her phone, I placed the bank statements on the table in front of her. "What is this?" I asked, my voice low but firm. She glanced at the papers and then back at me, feigning innocence. "What's what?" "Don't play dumb, Veronica. These withdrawals, $50,000, gone." "Where did it go?" Her face paled, but she quickly recovered, tears welling up in her eyes. "Jack, I can explain. It's not what you think." "Then explain," I said, crossing my arms. She hesitated, then said, "It's Andrea. She's been drowning in debt, Jack. Credit cards, medical bills. She was too ashamed to tell anyone, and I didn't want Mom and Dad to find out. I had to help her." Her explanation was convincing, and for a moment, I felt a pang of guilt for doubting her. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, my voice softening. "I would have helped if I'd known." "I didn't want to burden you," she said, reaching for my hand. "You've already done so much for us." Still, something didn't sit right. A few days later, I decided to call Andrea myself. We'd always gotten along, and I figured she might appreciate knowing I was in her corner. "Andrea," I began after some small talk, "I heard you've been going through a tough time. I just wanted to check in." Her confusion was immediate. "What are you talking about, Jack? Tough time with what?" I hesitated. "Veronica said you've been struggling with debt. She mentioned helping you out financially." There was a long pause, and then she laughed, a dry, bitter sound. "Jack, I don't know what she's told you, but I'm fine. Veronica hasn't given me a dime." I felt the ground shift beneath me. "You're sure?" I asked, my voice tight. "Positive. If anything, I'd be the one bailing her out." When I hung up, my hands were shaking. Veronica had lied, straight to my face. That evening, I confronted her again, armed with the truth. This time, there were no tears, no feigned innocence. "Fine," she admitted, her voice cold. "I've been gambling. But I can fix it, Jack. I just need time." "Time?" I repeated, incredulous. "You've taken $50,000 from our business, our future. Do you have any idea what you've done?" She looked at me, her expression unrepentant. "I didn't think you'd notice." That was it for me. I couldn't look at her the same way anymore. The trust we'd built, the partnership we'd nurtured, it was all gone. "I want you out," I said, my voice shaking. "You've taken everything from me. This business, this dream, it's over." To my surprise, she didn't argue. She packed her things and left that night, disappearing as quickly as she had entered my life. By the time the door closed behind her, I felt a strange mix of relief and devastation. In the months that followed, I worked tirelessly to pick up the pieces. The hungry fox didn't survive the fallout, and I found myself starting from scratch, financially and emotionally. But as painful as it was, losing Veronica taught me a hard truth: trust is fragile, and once it's broken, there's no going back. Years had passed since The Hungry Fox folded, and with it, the chapter of my life that included Veronica. In the time since, I had clawed my way back from the edge of financial ruin, first working long hours in someone else's kitchen, then saving enough to open a small bistro on the east side of Portland. Slowly but surely, the bistro became a success, known for its seasonal menu and intimate, welcoming vibe. By the time I was ready to open a second location, I felt like I had finally left the past behind. The new restaurant's grand opening was a big deal. It was a chilly autumn evening, and the air carried the crisp scent of fallen leaves mixed with wood smoke. The small street where the restaurant was located buzzed with energy. Friends, family, and local foodies filled the space, their chatter and laughter spilling out onto the sidewalk. String lights twinkled overhead, and I stood at the bar, shaking hands and accepting congratulations. It felt like the culmination of years of hard work, and for once, I allowed myself to feel proud. And then I saw her. She stood in the doorway, hesitant, as if she wasn't sure she should come in. Veronica. It had been so long, but I recognized her instantly. She looked different. Softer, somehow. Her auburn hair was pulled back neatly, and her expression, once so full of bravado, now carried a hint of vulnerability. She caught my eye and smiled, a small, almost shy smile. "Jack," she said as she approached, her voice just as I remembered but tinged with something I couldn't quite place. "Long time no see." I was too stunned to respond immediately. Finally, I managed, "Veronica. You. What are you doing here?" She looked down for a moment, brushing a stray hair from her face. "I heard about your new place. I wanted to see it for myself." The crowd around us seemed to fade as we spoke. I couldn't help but notice how much she had changed, or at least appeared to have changed. There was a gentleness to her now that had never been there before. I wasn't sure if it was real or just something she was putting on for my benefit. "You look different," I said finally. She chuckled softly. "It's been a long time, Jack. A lot has happened. So, where have you been all these years?" Her gaze flickered away for a moment before she answered. "Japan," she said. "I lived there for a while. I needed a fresh start." "Japan?" I repeated, surprised. "What brought you there?" She hesitated, then said, "I wanted to get away from everything. Clear my head. I worked at a bakery in Kyoto for a few years. It was humbling, but it was also healing." She paused, meeting my eyes. "I'm sorry, Jack. For everything. I know I can't undo the past, but I've changed. I needed you to know that." I didn't know what to make of her apology. Part of me wanted to tell her to leave, to protect the life I had worked so hard to rebuild. But another part of me, a quieter, more vulnerable part, was curious. Was she really different? Or was this just another act? Over the next few days, Veronica kept showing up at the restaurant. At first, I thought it was a one-time visit, but she became a regular fixture, always sitting at the same table near the window. She'd ordered dishes from our old menu, recipes we had created together during the early days of the food truck. She'd sit there for hours, sipping her drink and watching me work. It was unnerving at first, but I couldn't help noticing how her presence stirred old memories. One evening, after the dinner rush had quieted down, I approached her table. She was eating a bowl of roasted tomato soup, a recipe we'd created together years ago. She looked up at me, a faint smile playing on her lips. "Do you remember this soup?" she asked, gesturing to the bowl. It was the first recipe we ever collaborated on. You wanted to add rosemary, and I thought it needed smoked paprika. We argued for hours before compromising. I nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. "I remember. You were convinced no one would notice the rosemary. And you were convinced paprika would overpower it," she said with a laugh. Turns out we were both right. The next time she came by, she brought a small bundle wrapped in brown paper. "I thought you might want these," she said, handing it to me. Inside, I found an old kitchen towel, faded and stained from years of use, and a stack of photographs. They were pictures from our food truck days, Veronica and I grinning behind the counter, our first catering gig, the truck parked in its original, slightly battered glory. "I found these while I was unpacking after I came back to the States," she said. I thought you might like to have them. I didn't know what to say. Seeing those photos brought back a flood of emotions, nostalgia, regret, even a little joy. She also handed me a notebook, its cover worn and its pages filled with familiar handwriting. My old recipe journal. You kept this? I asked, flipping through the pages. Of course, she said softly. I couldn't bring myself to throw it away. As the weeks went by, Veronica's presence became a quiet but persistent part of my life. She never pushed, never demanded anything. She simply showed up, eating the food we'd once created together, sharing stories about her time in Japan, and reminding me of the person she used to be. Or maybe the person she wanted me to see. One evening, as I was closing up the restaurant, she lingered near the door. Jack, she said hesitantly, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I hope you can see that I've changed. I want to make things right. It was a chilly November evening in Portland, the kind where the air bites just enough to remind you winter is around the corner. I had just wrapped up a long shift at the restaurant, the kind where the hours blur together, and you're too tired to do anything but collapse on the couch. The streets were quiet as I locked up, the faint glow of streetlights reflecting off the damp pavement. When I got home, the warmth of my small bungalow greeted me. I had barely kicked off my shoes when there was a knock at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone, and for a second, I hesitated. But when I opened it, there stood Veronica, bundled in a long coat, her auburn hair slightly damp from the misty drizzle. In one hand, she held a bottle of wine, and in the other, a pie dish covered with a red and white checkered cloth. Veronica, I said, surprised. What are you doing here? She smiled, but there was a nervousness behind it. I figured you'd be too tired to cook after a long day, so I thought I'd bring dessert. She uncovered the dish to reveal a homemade apple pie, its golden crust glistening faintly in the light. I stepped aside to let her in, still trying to process the moment. You made this? I asked, shutting the door behind her. She nodded. I remembered you once said an apple pie could be a work of art if made with enough passion. I thought it was time to put that theory to the test. As we sat at the dining table, the room dimly lit by the flickering glow of a single candle, Veronica poured the wine. The aroma of cinnamon and baked apples filled the air, mingling with the faint crackle of the wood-burning fireplace. There was a tentative warmth between us, like we were treading carefully on unfamiliar ground. Jack, she began, her voice trembling slightly, I've been doing a lot of thinking. About us, about the person I used to be. I made so many mistakes, hurt you in ways I didn't even realize until it was too late. I didn't say anything, letting her words fill the space. She took a deep breath and continued. I want to make things right. Not just with you, but for myself too. I've spent so much time running from who I was, trying to be better. And I know I can't undo the past, but I'd like to try to start over. If you'll let me. Her eyes shimmered in the candlelight, and for a moment, I saw the vulnerability she had tried so hard to hide all those years ago. I could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on me. Could I trust her again? Could I risk reopening old wounds? Finally, I spoke. Veronica, I've rebuilt my life from scratch since you left. Letting you back in isn't something I can take lightly. I understand, she said quickly, her voice earnest. I'm not asking for a guarantee or for you to forget everything that happened. I just want a chance to prove that I've changed. I studied her face for a long moment before nodding. All right, I said, my voice measured. One chance. But if I see even a hint of the old patterns, this ends. Her relief was palpable, and for the first time that evening, her smile reached her eyes. Over the next few weeks, Veronica started spending more time at the restaurant. She wasn't just visiting anymore, she wanted to help. At first, it was small things, handling social media posts, greeting customers during peak hours, but soon, she was contributing in bigger ways. Her marketing ideas were sharp, her energy infectious. She even helped revamp the menu design, bringing a fresh, modern look that matched the restaurant's vibe. One evening, after closing, we sat in the office going over spreadsheets. Veronica had taken an interest in the restaurant's finances, offering to help streamline costs and track expenses more efficiently. "You're good at this," I admitted, leaning back in my chair. "Better than I expected." She smirked, pretending to be offended. "I'll take that as a compliment, though I hope you expected at least a little competence." We both laughed, and for a moment, it felt like old times. But this time, there was a maturity to her, a groundedness I hadn't seen before. It made me cautiously optimistic that maybe, just maybe, she really had changed. Things seemed perfect, too perfect. And that's when life has a way of testing you. One day, as I was going over our bank statements, I noticed a transaction I didn't recognize. It wasn't large, but it was unusual, a payment to a vendor we didn't typically use. I made a mental note to ask Veronica about it, but as the days went by, more discrepancies appeared. At first, I told myself it was probably nothing. Mistakes happen. But the nagging feeling in my gut wouldn't go away. I started keeping a closer eye on the accounts, double-checking every transaction. One evening, after closing, I brought it up. "Veronica," I said, trying to keep my tone neutral, "do you know anything about these charges? They're from vendors we don't usually work with." She looked at the statements, her brow furrowing. "I don't recognize them," she said, handing the papers back to me. "Maybe it's a mistake." I nodded, but something about her response didn't sit right. She seemed calm, too calm. My instincts told me there was more to the story, but I didn't push. Not yet. As the weeks went on, the tension between us grew. Veronica's contributions to the restaurant were undeniable, our profits were up, and her marketing strategies were bringing in more customers than ever. But the questions lingering in the back of my mind kept me on edge. Trust, once broken, isn't easy to rebuild. And while part of me wanted to believe in her, another part couldn't shake the fear that history might be repeating itself. One night, as I sat alone in the office, I opened the accounting software and began cross-referencing transactions. My heart sank as I found more inconsistencies, more payments that didn't add up. It was like déjà vu, a painful reminder of the betrayal that had nearly destroyed me years ago. I closed the laptop, my hands trembling. This time, I wouldn't wait for the answers to come to me. If there was something Veronica wasn't telling me, I was going to find out. It was a brisk Tuesday morning in early December. I remember it vividly because the frost on the windows sparkled as sunlight filtered through, and the quiet hum of life in my neighborhood was just beginning to stir. I had the rare luxury of a late start at the restaurant that day and planned to spend the morning catching up on some overdue paperwork. Veronica, as usual, had left early, her dedication to helping with the restaurant still seemingly unwavering. Around 9 a.m., my phone buzzed. It was a text from her. "Hey Jack, I forgot my laptop at home. Can you send me the presentation file in the marketing concepts folder? Needed ASAP for a client meeting." "Sure," I texted back, setting my coffee mug down and heading to the desk in the spare bedroom where she often worked. Her laptop was right where she'd left it, plugged in and humming quietly. I opened the laptop and navigated to the folder she mentioned. As I was about to attach the file, a folder at the bottom of the screen caught my eye. It was labeled simply, "Private." Normally, I wouldn't have given it a second thought, but something about it made me pause. It wasn't like Veronica to password protect anything on her personal devices, not that I knew of. Curiosity got the better of me. I clicked on the folder, and as expected, a password prompt popped up. I hesitated, telling myself it wasn't my business. But the little voice in the back of my mind, the one that had been on high alert since the discrepancies in our finances, wouldn't let me walk away. After a few failed attempts to guess the password, I remembered something Veronica had told me years ago, during one of those late-night conversations where you share pieces of yourself you don't normally reveal. She'd talked about the day her mother passed away, a memory so painful she described it as the worst day of her life. I typed in the date, holding my breath. It worked. The folder opened. At first, the files seemed unremarkable, scans of old documents, photos, and spreadsheets. But as I dug deeper, I found something that made my stomach churn. I leaned back in the chair, my hands shaking as I processed what I'd just uncovered. The woman who had re-entered my life with promises of change and redemption wasn't just hiding a dark past, she was actively involved in something far worse than I could have imagined. For a few minutes, I couldn't move. My mind raced through every interaction we'd had since her return. Had I been blind? Foolish? Or had she simply been that good at hiding the truth? I couldn't help but think back to the first time she walked back into my life at the restaurant opening. The vulnerability in her eyes, the genuine-sounding apology, the slow, steady effort to rebuild trust, all of it felt like a carefully crafted illusion now. Was any of it real? I knew I couldn't confront her immediately. Whatever she was involved in, it wasn't just dangerous for her, it could put me, the restaurant, and everyone I cared about in jeopardy. I needed time to think, to figure out my next move. I made a copy of the folder onto a USB drive, carefully deleted any trace of my access, and sent her the file she had asked for. Then I closed the laptop, sat on the couch, and stared at the wall for what felt like hours. The Veronica I thought I knew was gone. In her place was someone I didn't recognize, a person capable of deception on a scale I'd never encountered before. The weight of the discovery pressed down on me, suffocating and unrelenting. I wasn't just dealing with a personal betrayal anymore. This was something far bigger, far darker. And I had no idea how to handle it. The morning after I found the incriminating files, the house felt eerily quiet. Even the hum of the refrigerator seemed louder than usual as I sat in the kitchen, staring at the USB drive holding Veronica's secrets. My mind was spinning, filled with doubts, fear, and a strange sense of responsibility. I didn't know whether to feel relieved or terrified, but one thing was clear, this was bigger than anything I could handle on my own. By midday, I decided I couldn't sit on it any longer. I made my way to the downtown police station, clutching the drive in my pocket like it was a ticking time bomb. The reception area was bright and bustling, a stark contrast to the dark thoughts weighing me down. After explaining what I had, they brought me into a small, windowless office where a detective introduced himself as Ramirez. Detective Ramirez was in his late 40s, his sharp eyes and calm demeanor immediately putting me at a strange ease. He wore a navy suit that looked slightly too large, as though he'd lost weight recently from stress or long hours. He listened intently as I explained what I'd found on Veronica's laptop, occasionally scribbling notes in a leather-bound notebook. "Mr. Jack," he said, his voice measured, "this isn't just about your ex-partner. The documents you've shown us suggest a criminal network spanning multiple countries. We've been investigating a narcotics operation between Japan and the US for years. This could be the break we've been waiting for." Hearing the gravity in his voice sent a chill down my spine. "So, what happens now?" I asked, my throat dry. "We need your help," he said, leaning forward slightly. "If what you've uncovered is accurate, Veronica may be more deeply involved than we thought. But we can't act on this alone. We need more evidence, more connections to the larger network." I swallowed hard. "What does that mean for me?" Ramirez hesitated for a moment before answering. "We'll need you to keep things as normal as possible. Don't confront her. Don't let on that you know anything. If she's truly part of this operation, she might lead us to others. We'll place her under surveillance, but your cooperation will be crucial." The weight of his words settled heavily on me. You're asking me to pretend like nothing's wrong? To keep working with her, eating with her, living around her? He nodded solemnly. It won't be easy, but if we move too quickly, she could disappear, or worse, retaliate. The safety of everyone involved depends on careful timing. I sat there, torn. Part of me wanted to walk away, to wash my hands of the situation entirely. But another part, the part that had once loved Veronica, that still wanted to believe in the possibility of redemption, felt compelled to see it through. Okay, I said finally, my voice quiet but firm. I'll do it. The days that followed were some of the most surreal of my life. Veronica continued to show up at the restaurant, her usual mix of charm and efficiency making her a hit with customers and staff alike. She greeted me with the same warm smile, brought me coffee during busy shifts, and even pitched in during the dinner rush when we were short-staffed. To anyone on the outside, we looked like a team, a pair of exes who had managed to find their way back to a professional partnership. But inside, I was on edge. Every interaction felt like a test, every glance like a potential slip-up. I second-guessed every word, wondering if she could see through me, if she knew I was working with the police. At night, I barely slept, my mind replaying our conversations and trying to piece together the truth behind her actions. One evening, about 2 weeks after my meeting with Ramirez, Veronica and I stayed late to close the restaurant. The kitchen was quiet, the air heavy with the lingering smell of garlic and roasted vegetables. As we wiped down counters and stacked chairs, she turned to me suddenly. "Jack," she said, her tone unusually soft. "I've been meaning to ask, are you okay? You've seemed distant lately." My heart raced, but I forced myself to smile. "Just tired," I said, keeping my voice casual. "Opening the second location's been a lot of work." She nodded, her eyes searching mine for a moment before turning back to her task. "Well, if you ever need to talk, you know I'm here." The irony of her words wasn't lost on me. "Thanks," I muttered, hoping she didn't notice the strain in my voice. Meanwhile, Ramirez kept me updated on their progress. He assured me that Veronica was under constant surveillance, her phone, her movements, even her interactions at the restaurant. They were building a case, slowly but methodically, connecting the dots between her activities and the larger operation. One evening, Ramirez called me while I was closing up. "Jack," he said, his tone serious, "we're starting to see patterns in her communications. It looks like she's planning something big. We need you to stay alert." "What does that mean for me?" I asked, anxiety creeping into my voice. "It means she trusts you, which is good. But it also means you need to be careful. If she senses anything's off, she could disappear, or worse." Pretending became a full-time job. I laughed at her jokes, praised her ideas, and acted like everything was fine while my insides twisted with unease. I had to remind myself constantly why I was doing this, why I was risking so much. It wasn't just about the restaurant anymore. It was about stopping something much larger, something dangerous. But the closer I got to the truth, the more I began to question my own judgment. How had I not seen it sooner? The signs had been there, the lies, the secrecy, the inexplicable shifts in her behavior. And yet, I had let her back into my life, convinced she had changed. Now, I wasn't sure if I was playing her or if she was still playing me. And the uncertainty was almost unbearable. It was a cold Friday night in late January, one of those evenings when the wind howled through the streets and the chills seemed to seep into your bones. The restaurant had closed for the night, and I was in my office balancing the books, trying to shake off the unease that had taken up permanent residence in my chest since the investigation began. Veronica had stayed behind, as she often did, claiming she needed to check inventory. I heard her footsteps in the kitchen, then the muffled sound of her voice. At first, I thought she was talking to herself, but as I moved closer, I realized she was on the phone. Something about the tone of her voice made me pause. It was hushed, deliberate, nothing like the easygoing, professional demeanor she usually carried. I stopped just outside the kitchen door, straining to hear. "The shipment will arrive next week. I will handle everything. Don't worry," she said, her voice low but urgent. The words hit me like a freight train. Shipment? Handle everything? My mind raced, trying to connect the dots. Was this what Ramirez had been waiting for? Was this the big move he'd warned me about? I backed away quietly, my heart pounding in my chest. Once I was safely in the office, I grabbed my phone and called Ramirez. It was late, but he answered on the second ring. "What's up, Jack?" he asked, his voice sharp and alert. "She's planning something," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. "I just overheard her on the phone. She mentioned a shipment coming in next week and that she'd handle everything." Ramirez was silent for a moment, then said, "This is it. We've been monitoring her communications, and this matches what we've been seeing. We need to move quickly." The next morning, I met with Ramirez and his team at a quiet diner on the edge of town. The place was almost empty, the only other patrons a group of truckers nursing cups of coffee and plates of pancakes. We huddled in a booth near the back, going over the plan. "Jack, we need you to be the bait," Ramirez said, leaning forward, his voice barely above a whisper. "She trusts you. If you can lure her to a specific location, we can set up a sting operation." "Bait?" I repeated, the word making my stomach churn. "You're asking me to set her up?" "We're asking you to help stop a criminal operation that spans continents," Ramirez replied, his tone firm but not unkind. "This isn't just about her. It's about everyone she's working with. If we don't act now, they'll slip through our fingers." I looked down at the coffee cup in my hands, the dark liquid swirling as my thoughts raced. Could I do this? Could I betray someone who had once been such a big part of my life, even knowing what she had done? Finally, I nodded. "Okay. Tell me what to do." The plan was set in motion for the following week. Veronica believed she was meeting her associates at an old, abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city, a location Ramirez had carefully selected. The police had already secured the area, setting up hidden cameras and positioning undercover officers around the perimeter. My role was simple: bring Veronica to the location and act like everything was normal until the moment they moved in. That morning, the tension was unbearable. I barely slept the night before, replaying every possible scenario in my mind. By the time Veronica arrived at the restaurant to meet me, I felt like I was running on fumes. "Ready to go?" I asked, forcing a smile as I grabbed my jacket. She nodded, her expression calm, even cheerful. "I can't thank you enough for helping with this, Jack. It means a lot." Her words cut deeper than I expected, but I pushed the guilt aside. I had to remind myself why I was doing this, for the people she had hurt, for the lives that could be ruined if her operation continued unchecked. When we arrived at the warehouse, the air was thick with anticipation. The setting sun cast long shadows across the cracked pavement, and the faint smell of rust and decay hung in the air. Veronica glanced around, her expression unreadable. "This the place?" she asked. "Yeah," I said, keeping my tone casual. "Your guys should be here soon, right?" She nodded, pulling out her phone to send a message. I watched her closely, every nerve in my body on edge. Moments later, 2 black SUVs pulled up, their tinted windows concealing the faces inside. A group of men stepped out, their movements purposeful, their demeanor serious. It all happened so fast. As the men approached, the sound of sirens pierced the air, and undercover officers seemed to materialize out of nowhere. Shouts filled the space as the police moved in, weapons drawn. "Police! Hands in the air! Now!" Veronica's eyes widened in panic as she turned to me. "Jack! What's going on?" What did you do? I met her gaze, my voice steady despite the chaos around us. I did the right thing, Veronica. You went too far. She stared at me, a mix of shock, anger, and betrayal flashing across her face. Before she could say another word, an officer cuffed her hands behind her back and led her away. I watched as she disappeared into the crowd of officers and flashing lights, knowing this time, she was leaving my life for good. After everything unraveled, Veronica's story became a headline. Her arrest and the subsequent charges, fraud, conspiracy to commit murder, and drug trafficking, shook me to my core. It wasn't just about the crimes, it was about the web of lies and the people she had hurt along the way. It felt surreal watching her face flash across news reports, hearing her name mentioned in court proceedings. The woman I once knew, or thought I knew, was now the center of a criminal case that spanned continents. Sitting in my quiet living room one evening, I found myself thinking about her victims. Her husband in Japan, who narrowly escaped her deadly plans. The countless others who had been swept up in her schemes, people who, like me, had been fooled by her charm and intellect. And then there was me. I had to admit, I was one of her victims too, though I hated thinking of myself that way. What haunted me most wasn't just the crimes. It was a waste. Veronica had an undeniable gift, her creativity, intelligence, and ability to connect with people were extraordinary. She could walk into a room and light it up, convincing anyone of almost anything. That kind of charisma, paired with her sharp mind, could have built empires. Instead, it had been used to manipulate and destroy. I often replayed moments from our time together, trying to figure out where it had all gone wrong. Was there ever a version of her that was genuine? Or had she been wearing a mask from the start? I wanted to believe that some part of what we shared was real, that her passion for the food truck, her excitement for our creations, had come from an honest place. But in the end, those memories felt tainted, overshadowed by the darker truths I had uncovered. After the dust settled, I threw myself into the restaurant. It became my sanctuary, a place where I could focus on the present and the people who truly mattered. My staff, my customers, and the community I had built around the restaurant reminded me that trust wasn't entirely gone from the world, it just had to be earned. There were hard days, though. Nights when I'd sit in the office, staring at old photos of the food truck, wondering if I'd ever be able to let my guard down again. The scars from what happened weren't visible, but they were there, shaping the way I saw the world and the people around me. "Jack, you're zoning out again," one of my servers teased one afternoon as I spaced out during a busy lunch shift. "Sorry," I said with a sheepish smile, grabbing a tray to help clear tables. "Just thinking." "Well, think later." "Table 5 needs refills," they joked, snapping me back to the present. It was little moments like those that kept me grounded. The restaurant was thriving, and the people around me were kind, genuine, and hardworking. It was a stark contrast to the chaos Veronica had brought into my life. One quiet evening after closing, I sat at the bar with a glass of bourbon, reflecting on everything. The restaurant was empty, the lights dimmed, and the hum of the refrigerator was the only sound. It felt symbolic somehow, a moment of peace after the storm. I thought about the question that had been nagging at me for months: could I ever fully trust?